investigator with the center. Okay. And I'm also the co-chair of community engagement and intersection for the center. So to begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the Edwin S.H. Leong Centre for Healthy Aging is located on UBC's Point Grey campus, which is on what settlers refer to as Vancouver, Canada. These lands are the traditional, ancestral, and unceded stolen territories of the Hunkaminam-speaking Musqueam people. And we acknowledge that most of us are here today as uninvited guests on this territory. I'm deeply grateful to the traditional caretakers of these lands and waterways who've cared for them across deep time, and I'm honored to live, work, and learn here. In addition, I'd like to acknowledge that the research and activities of the center investigators, staff, and trainees take place more broadly on the lands of Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island and across the world. From coast to coast to coast and beyond, we acknowledge the traditional ancestral territories of all the Inuit, Métis, First Nations, and other Indigenous people, and thank them with gratitude for their stewardship of these lands. A reminder that Tuesday, September 30th, is our National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, also known as Orange Shirt Day. It's a day to honor and uphold survivors and intergenerational survivors of the Indian residential school system, and to commemorate those who didn't return home. Commemorating and learning the history and continued impact of residential schools and other colonial legacies is fundamental to truth and reconciliation. So I encourage you to wear an orange shirt and take part in activities that day. May we move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and respect, acknowledging the profound depths of Indigenous wisdom that continue to shape our collective future and guide our efforts in environmental protection, ensuring a sustainable world for all of us, all of those who come after us. Thank you. And now it is my great honor to introduce a new professor at UBC and with the center, Dr. Stephanie Blaine-Moraes. She's an associate professor in the School of Biomedical Engineering and Occupational Science and Occupational Therapy at UBC. She's just joined us and is a new investigator with the center and has previously been on faculty at McGill University. Stephanie leads the Biosignal Interaction and Personhood Technology Lab, which aims to develop technologies to assess consciousness and sustain relationships with minimally communicative persons. And Stephanie has been our speaker's postdoctoral supervisor and is going to do the honor of introducing Naila. Thank you.
Thanks, Julia. Thank you very much thank you. Thank you for being here. I'm so excited to be here at UBC with all of you. And I'm even more excited to introduce our speaker for today. Naila is a research associate at the Center for Human Potential Research on Human Potential, which is the research center of the National Circus School in Montreal. She did her bachelor's at the University of Saskatoon, and she completed her PhD here at the University of British Columbia. And then I had the great fortune of working with her for the past 5 years as a postdoc in my lab at Montreal. Naila, we actually just said goodbye because she left the lab, and I'll give a little bit of the reflections that I made when she left the lab. She is extraordinary. She has a deep, rigorous scientific mind, and then this capacity to form genuine relationships with people across all sorts of different experiences, different bodily differences, different trajectories through life. And she engages with them in an incredibly meaningful and powerful, profound way. And it's this intersection between the relationships that she builds with all sorts of different communities and the scientific rigor that she brings to some questions that she asks and engages with that produces the work that she's going to present here today. So I'm very honored to be able to introduce my former postdoc, Naila Kuhlmann.
Thank you, Stephanie. I'm a little thrown off. That was a very, very touching welcome, and I'm so happy to be here and so thankful for the invitation to be here. I'm not sure my mic is working. It is? It's good? Okay, perfect. So thank you for having me here today. It also feels very special to be back at UBC because, as Stephanie mentioned, I started my PhD here just a couple buildings over. And I started out here studying Parkinson's disease, and at the same time was getting very involved in community outreach, in the neurograd program, and in art science collaboration. So I have some former collaborators in the room, and this drawing or this illustration is partly my microscopy images from my PhD mixed with the imagination and the talent of a local artist here. So it feels really special to be back in this space and to get to share this work now from the years that have passed since I was been here. So I think I want to start very broadly with the focus of my research. I think really throughout my grad studies has been around communication. When it was in my PhD, it was communication at a neuronal level. So I was looking at how different neurons in the basal ganglia, which is the part of the brain that's really affected in Parkinson's. I was looking at communication between neurons and all of the complexity of how neurons communicate with one another. And now I've zoomed out a little and I'm more interested in human communication or perhaps human interaction more generally, and the mess and complexity of communication, particularly when we are divided by things that can't be put into words. So the experiences that are difficult to put into words, and one thing that leaves one person's mouth and ends up in someone else's mind can be quite mixed up in the lack of common shared experience. And so that, that can affect obviously our friendships, our personal relationships. It can also affect, in the context of neurological conditions, our interactions with a healthcare professional and their ability to empathize or understand our experience. It also impacts how researchers conduct their work. And from my experience working in a wet lab, we very rarely talk to people with lived experience or really understand their experience and consider it in our work. And then also it impacts the broader community and the misperceptions or the stigmatization we have around certain ways of being, in this case, certain neurological conditions. And so my interest is really, how do we disentangle some of this communication using the arts? And I'll get into why I think the arts are a potential tool for facilitating communication. But I'm really interested very broadly in the performing arts, as well as in different technologies as tools for nonverbal communication or for connecting differently when verbal communication fails us. So in the last years, thanks to Stephanie, I've had the chance to really think about what is my research program, what is it that I want to carry forward coming out of my postdoc and into this new position. And so, I mean, there's so many words I could use, but the words I have for now coalesced around are connection, communication, and co-creation, and taking a very participatory approach to doing research, as well as a sensory approach. So really focusing on the senses and the bodies as a source of information and a source of understanding and knowledge as well. So a broad question that motivates me in my work is, how does the body shape our experiential knowledge and our interpersonal relationships? And how do the arts and technologies, or how may they serve to recenter the body in research and practice? I like also being in a bilingual environment in Montreal because it's also bringing sense back into the research. And some of these things work better in French than in English, but that's really at the core of my research program, and also my, as you'll see, the creation is this question of how the body shapes our interpersonal interactions and our different ways of knowing. And just to anchor, to give some theoretical anchors and frameworks that have really inspired or shaped my work. One is embodiment. So there are many, many philosophers and current researchers and neuroscientists, again, some of them in the room, who focus a lot on, we're not just although much of neuroscience would have us believe in our training that we are just brains in a vat, in a vessel, we are not that. There's a lot that's shaped in how we go about the world and how our different bodies shape the way we interact with the world and with others. And so embodiment is really key to my research. And if anyone is interested, there's a talk later today at Green College by Thomas Fuchs, which also pushes this a lot further. So I encourage you to go. Participatory sense making is another one. So Hannah de Jager and Di Paolo, this is a framework that is applied in a lot of different contexts around intersubjectivity and what emerges between two people or a group of people that is more than one person's agency or what one person, it really emerges in the interaction. So that is, how we make meaning together, how we problem solve together, what emerges in the interaction that is beyond our individual minds and bodies. And this is a core element in my work as well. Boundary objects. So these are objects that have a common structure, but are flexible enough to have different meanings and different interpretations in different social worlds. And for me, the artistic media I use, and I'll show some examples, act as boundary objects, as something that people can gather around. It's a thing to think with, but from very different perspectives. And the last thing, which I think is important to mention also in a biomedical context, is disability aesthetics. So this is really an approach or a recognition. This is a book written by Tobin Siebers, and it's really recognizing the connection between empathy and how we respond and react to other human bodies with the connection, or with how we respond to pieces of art and aesthetics. So that there's a very close relationship between aesthetics and how we interact and react to other bodies. And so here, in contrast to a biomedical model where, disability is a deficit, having Parkinson's or another neurological condition is always from a deficit standpoint, there is also something to be imagined and that is beautiful in disability. And it's a standpoint of being in the world that is one that we can learn from and create from. And so that is a big anchor in my work as well. So why the arts? This is my take on it, around perspective taking and how the arts allow us to integrate in our communication things that are sensory, things that are felt, and to be able to take perspective. So I think of this, and again, this is my wording. I don't know how widely it can be applied, but I think about something like a film or a performance on stage being a third-person perspective. So you're watching a story unfold, you're watching these scenarios. So in this example, the father, it's a story of a man with dementia and his daughter, and you're seeing how that might be for someone. Then there's so that for me is the third person perspective. This is second person. So this is an interactional activity. And here I fold in the technologies with my arts-based approaches, because I think technologies with the arts is a really strong combination. But this is a technology coming from Stephanie and from the BIAPT lab. So it's biomusic. It's a little sensor that you put on the finger. It records 3 autonomic nervous system signals. And based on their variation, you have different musical or auditory outputs. So it's a way of facilitating connection and communication with someone who is minimally communicative, so who might not be physically responsive or verbally responsive, but it allows for this interpersonal connection that is facilitated by music and something emerging from the body. And that has also been used in the context of a dance program with people with dementia. So biomusic was also integrated into that, or the sensors were integrated into that. For me, these are second person ways of using the arts to foster that kind of interaction. And then there's first person perspective. So this, I think, is really the potential of technology such as virtual reality is to bring you into the experience directly. So this is an example of a experience of writing when you have Parkinson's. And so here you're seeing it from the first person perspective, and you're invited to experience it through your body, through the virtual reality. And lastly, there's also a mix. So this is the body swap that I had tried at Be Another Lab and that we recreated in Montreal. And so this is two people doing an interactive activity. They're synchronized, they're being facilitated to do the same actions, but their view is switched. So they have the first person perspective of the other person. And so you get this illusion of being in the body of the other person if you can really synchronize your movement. So for me, there's a lot of potential here that goes beyond what we traditionally use, especially in academic contexts. We are very verbal, very cerebral, and we rarely think of these other ways of connecting and communicating and sharing knowledge, or producing knowledge for that matter. So that is where I arrived when I finished my PhD in neuroscience in a lab. I was very, very disconnected from people with lived experience. And I was frustrated by, here I had produced a thesis that maybe 10 people would read, and I produced some really complex diagrams that maybe, a very small field in neuroscience would understand. And then what about everyone else, and particularly the people that I was hoping to help with my work? So how do I communicate that knowledge to them? But then also, how could we integrate their perspectives more in how we conduct research? Which led me to do Peace of Mind, thanks to Stephanie. Stephanie took me on as a postdoc with this very sort of left field idea of what I wanted to do, which was to bring together people with Parkinson's, performing artists and researchers, neuroscientists, in order to facilitate knowledge exchange and empathy. In parallel, I did a project with dementia. So I had two projects at the same time, one around dementia and one around Parkinson's. My presentation will focus more on the Parkinson's work, but I'm also happy to talk about the dementia work in the discussion period. So the first aim was really to facilitate knowledge exchange and empathy through creative collaboration. And the ultimate objective then was to co-create two performances based on scientific research and lived experience in order to engage with a wide audience. And so these performances, we were bringing in circus artists, dancers, musicians, and so they were interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary performances, and intersectoral in that it was bridging research with the broader Parkinson's community and the arts. And so this was during COVID, and although originally I wanted to gather everyone in the same room, we ended up coming together all on Zoom for about a 4-month period every 2 weeks. And every session would start in movement or in a creative activity together. So it was always the way we came together was outside of words first, and we would often draw from, here you can see these little YouTube videos. The neuroscientists and artists at the start of the project created little art science videos, which were little first attempts to communicate a scientific concept or question through the different artistic disciplines that we had in the group. So every week we would draw from one of those art science videos for our group activity. We would open in movement for about half an hour and then turn to discussion around what were the key messages we wanted to put into the performance, what were the intersections between lived experience and scientific research, and how would the various artistic disciplines that we had in the group best function to communicate or convey those experiences and those messages. We then came into studio. So here, it's hard to see, but there's sort of half of our group in studio and the other half still on Zoom. And we had these back and forths, and every week we would send little updates to the participants who were still on Zoom, as many of them couldn't join us. But we did, in the Parkinson's project, have a woman with Parkinson's who joined us in studio and joined us for the final creation of the performance. So here's a photo of when we presented live in Montreal. So we have the circus and dance performers, and then Anne, who is sort of taking on she was the protagonist, but it's not just her story, it was also the story of the other participants in our project and more broadly. And then we have a lot of on YouTube, we have a lot of making of vignettes, like highlighting different aspects of the project. And I've also published written descriptions of the two performances. So I'll just pause here to show a little teaser of the Parkinson's performance. So I also just want to mention the music. Thank you. The music is by a neuroscientist. You saw her briefly rocking out as a DJ. So there was a lot of overlap in the roles and a lot of blurring of the roles that people played in this project, where someone maybe came in as a neuroscientist, but also brought their musical talent. Or another example that I really want to highlight is a woman with Parkinson's who shared a poem quite early in the process. It's a poem in French, but she actually did translate it later. So it's on the brink, or sur le fil. And in French, the metaphor is really around the experience of Parkinson's as being on a tightrope. And so all of the ways she's thrown off throughout her day, the experience of learning to walk in a new way with Parkinson's. And so when she shared this poem, it resonated with all of the participants with Parkinson's in the group, but it also resonated with the circus artists, and we also found parallels to scientific research. So it was really something that we all gathered around from different perspectives. And so when she shared the poem, the first idea was, okay, could we create music around this poem? Could we put this poem into music so that it could be presented in that form in our performance? So she worked with one of the musicians on the project, and that musician sent her this as a first proposal.
Sur le fil, je respire, je bois, je mange, je dors. Sur le fil, je crie, je pleure, je jouis, j'ai peur. Sur le fil, suspendu.
It's a really lovely song. I sometimes just want to listen to it. But when she shared that with Lily said, oh my gosh, I don't think you understood my experience. That's not at all how someone with Parkinson's experiences time. And so that was a very specific feedback to give. Like, this melodic, beautiful song is not how I experience time. And so we came back into a virtual session that focused around the experience of time. And we did these kind of round robin activities. We were in different breakout rooms, and everyone would start, the person with Parkinson's would start by sharing their experience. Then we would have one of the artists interpret that, just improvise. And then we would have the neuroscientist fill in how how that related to their research. And from that session, Caroline had, she had an interaction with another participant and then thought, okay, violin is maybe would capture it better. So this was her second proposal.
Sur le fil, je respire, je bois, je mange, je dors. Sur le fil, je crie, je pleure, je jouis, j'ai peur. Sur le fil, suspendu, je chavire, incongru, je délire.
So it goes on like that. I just want to verify, is it the audio comes through on Zoom? Okay, good. So that spoke much more to Lily's experience. And from that version, we then created a version, all of us together on Zoom, where people would come in and say a few lines. So it really became a collective musical piece that really, again, anchored us in this process. So we then wanted to bring it onto stage. And the first exploration in studio was this. Everyone was sort of dropping off on the side as Heidi was advancing on the slack line. And I showed it to Lili and she said, oh my gosh, what did you do with my poem? Like, it's meant to be this poem of resilience and hope. And here you have like everyone dropping off like flies on the way. And so, okay, that was a big lesson again. And it really came from bringing it into a different media. Like, what does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it look like? And every step of the way, it was coming back to her experience and understanding it a little bit better by bringing it into a different modality or medium. So then this is what it ended up with. And you saw a little clip in the teaser, a much more, again, resonant with her experience, and not just her experience, but the message she wanted to send through the poem. And she said afterwards in a interview, so this is translated from French, but I was really happy to share my words and have them experienced by other people. And above all, that it's out of my hands, that at some point people take what you do and that's part of creation. That we arrive at something together, it's a really beautiful gift. And so for me, her poem is an example of a boundary object here. And it's also speaks to the co-creative process that it was always coming back to her experience, but at some point it's also more than, and it also represents for me this participatory sense making because we added our voices and our interpretations in along the way. What is this now? Oh, okay. So I just wanted to zoom out a little bit to the participant experience in the process and the interviews I did at the end, and come back to those. I talked about embodiment and participatory sense making and disability aesthetics at the start. So for me, this quote represents how we had very different perspectives, but a shared goal. So I think everybody, regardless of the role they were holding in the group, there was something that they didn't know, which meant they needed to sit back and listen as much as there was a point for them to come forward and say something. So it was really this, I like the term symmetry of ignorance, but maybe it should also be symmetry of expertise or of knowledge, in that everyone had something to contribute and they had their own personal expertise, but they also had something they didn't know. So there was really this very generous listening and curiosity towards one another. And there was also this blurring of roles. So we didn't split hairs like, oh, you're a dancer, you're a juggler, you're a tightrope walker. I don't think we judged each other by the title which we had, which I think, again, is very important in classical neuroscience or biomedical research, where the patient is the patient and that's it, and they're the subject, and there's a real power dynamic in a lot of the ways that we approach research with different populations, patient populations. And then this getting to know one another outside of words or without words. One of the participants said, you are able to see each other, you are able to see other people in their movement without them having to tell you, exactly what they're doing, what they're feeling, whatever. You could sort of just see it. And I think in the beginning, it really just facilitates communicating with each other. And then lastly, we talked a lot about how do we create a piece around Parkinson's that is not imitating or parodying Parkinson's. We don't want the circus performers or dancers recreating, Parkinson's tremor, etc. And so we talked about Parkinson's being the kernel. We like that word, like the kernel of the choreography and of the movement vocabulary we were working with. So there was a lot of back and forth between the dancers and circus artists asking questions of people with Parkinson's, like how do you get up in the day? And this real curiosity that was driven by the motivation to create something, but that also I think is very relevant for a neurologist to know, but maybe because it's not, it's not as goal oriented in terms of, okay, how can I treat or manage these symptoms? We don't think to ask these questions. So the artist brought a curiosity that was really unique and really important in this project. And to come back to, especially on Zoom, we were all these little squares on the screen. And so one participant said, some moments I really remember watching the screen and like, I don't know who has Parkinson's now, because everybody moves in their own way and it's interesting. Everybody is interesting in his own way. We all just love to dance. So that and other aspects of the participant experience are in this paper that I'm happy to share afterwards. So in one of the scenes in Peace of Mind, when Anne, she comes out and she addresses the audience and she asks everyone, and this is actually her illustration, she asks everyone to sit uncomfortably as if they were her. And so she takes you through how one should sit if you want to experience the discomfort of Parkinson's. And you hear everyone in the audience shuffling on their seats. And I think for many people afterwards, they told that was a moment they held on to, like being invited to experience it in their own body. And so that brought about this question after Peace of Mind of what aspects of our sensory and bodily emotional experiences, I'll say embodied from now on, can neither be put into words, but also not fully conveyed on stage. And then how might technology serve as a more immersive and multisensory approach? So this is particularly in the context of Parkinson's, where there's the body is changing constantly, and there's symptoms that from the outside, in the scene, we have the neurologists, the doctors trying to feel rigidity in the arm and really feel, okay, what is freezing? What is rigidity when you haven't experienced it? And so, I mean, this was a little bit of a parody of how callous the healthcare professionals might be in trying to feel that experience. But it's true, like how would you understand or know what freezing is if you haven't experienced it in your own body? At the same time, I think that applies to circus artists as well. I think few of us know what it's like to be hanging from your hair or to be like projected through the air or to be upside down. Those are very different ways of inhabiting a body and being in the world from what I imagine many of you have experienced. And so in Peace of Mind, there was this really rich exchange between the performing artists and the people with Parkinson's in what it is to have a body and to have a body that might be losing control or trying to master control, learning new ways of moving. And so this inspired this next project, which we've called Living Rooms, which is how can we better share those experiences that can't be put into words, can't be understood just from seeing or seeing a representation on stage? How might technologies allow us to access and communicate them differently? So the project took place over a year and a half. We started with exploratory workshops around different technologies and different questions of embodied experience. Then we moved on to a co-design or co-creation phase. So this was really sessions around specific technologies and working with them to capture or convey specific experiences. And then we had a kind of public lab, or we created a little immersive performance, but the goal was really to share the questions that we had come to together, some of the reflections we had come to, and then use this immersive performance as a way of conveying those experiences without the focus being on, okay, now this is an artistic performance as such. I don't know if this will, I think oh, yes. Okay, good. It'll work. So I'm just going to turn down the volume. Oh, is it okay if I speak over it?
Mon corps était.
I'll let it play out.
Toutes les fenêtres sont ouvertes. L'air frais rentrait partout dans la maison. Dans le tapis.
I'll pause it there. So this was just in our sort of a dress rehearsal, a video we threw together, but it gives you a sense of what the performance was. It was these individual rooms. We thought about the body as a house, which became again, like this really anchoring metaphor in our project. We had that as a check-in activity every day. Like, if my body were a house, today the roof is leaking and I just need to air it out or something, it was a way of sharing our experience. And so with the body as the house, we had different rooms and different vignettes that included people with Parkinson's and circus artists sharing their experience, and then had different technologies, but also physical objects integrated as a way of for me, it's finding the best way that these experiences that were shared, ultimately also in words in the process, how do they best live in, is it a physical form? Is it audio? Is it visual? How are they best understood when you share them with a broader audience? And so we also had interactive activities at the end. We had a group discussion. We had sort of reflective prompts, and it was really trying to bring the audience in as a participant in the experience as well. So I want to, with my remaining time, just highlight the journey of two different technologies we used in the project. The first being vibrotactile technologies, more specifically here, a tremor armband. So this is an existing technology that we were able to borrow from Click Labs. And here the first question was, how can we understand the feeling of loss of control, specifically motor control, in this example of tremor? So what does, this is the most literal translation or simulation of a Parkinson's experience, is we'll just put this armband on and you feel tremor, and then you try to write, etc. And so this was our starting point. We used this technology in one of our workshops. In the same workshop, we had other vibrotactile technologies to explore more abstracted and maybe more artistic forms of thinking about tremor and vibration. But here we started with this, and one of the participants tried it on in front of everyone. And in response, one of the participants with Parkinson's, well, I'll backtrack. In response, in seeing it, he said, "No, that's not my experience." And that, I think, was the reaction of several people in the room, seeing it from the outside. Like, you can't just put on Parkinson's. Like, it's not, you just don't wear it as a glove and take it off and that's it. And so later on, he shared in a little testimonial, he said, it's very important to understand that when you have tremors, that eventually it becomes who you are, and it's just the way it is. And you go on living with it and you're all by yourself, it's just who you are. When you are with other people or you're in a presentation mode, you're preoccupied with it. And so it's really the perception that others have. In those times, you try to cover it up, control it, which is often the worst thing to do. And I'm learning to live with this. That's the way it is. There's no simulation in the world that can possibly recreate what I live with, what I'm feeling with, and what has become who I am. So he really ended on this note of, you can't simulate my experience. And that brought up really important questions that were already underneath the surface, but it really brought to the surface these questions of disability simulation and what it is to ever really understand someone else's experience. Can you you can't reduce an experience to these different components. On the other hand, when I later interviewed the person who had tried on the technology, he shared that for him, experiencing the tremor armband was like an aha moment. It was the first time in my life I realized I'm fighting my brain. I'm actively fighting my sensory perception. And this was something I was never aware of. It changed my life from that point onward. But at the same time, we had the person with Parkinson's saying, oh, that's not at all what Parkinson's is. but it showed the complexity and what the whole thing is about, creating an embodied experience, because how does that person know what I experience? So it became this kind of, okay, from the outside, this person watching someone try on an experience of Parkinson's said, well, that's not my experience. And he shared, you know, like, it's when other people see my tremor that I feel, it's more the social aspect of it. But here he was seeing something from the outside, and the person who had experienced it was saying, it's not, you know, it was the first time that I felt this loss of control between my mind and my body. And that might have been closer to what someone with Parkinson's feels on a daily basis. But it was this real complex interaction between, you know, what is felt from the inside, what is seen from the outside, and then what aspects of an experience could ever be simulated or recreated. And I think it also highlights the importance in this project of having a discussion around it. We always came back, the technology was a prompt to get into these questions together. So in the final performance, we ended up taking two different approaches to sharing this experience. One was the face-to-face with James, which ended up being the most powerful vignette for a lot of people. And it was the most simple technology of putting on headphones, sitting across from James, listening to the testimonial that I just read, or listening to another one, something he had shared in French. And you just listen to him share his experience as he takes you in. And it's just, James just pours out empathy and love for people. And so it was this really interesting reversal of roles that was facilitated by a very simple technology of putting on headphones. The other one, this photo is difficult to see what's going on, but we have a handstand, so a circus artist in a handstand. They have a sensor on that's recording their tremor in their arm, or the muscle activity in their arm. And the idea was that at the same time you would be drawing them. So it's this, you're paying attention to them in a very different way when you're drawing someone. It's a way of, really attending to them. And the moment that there was a tremor in the arm that came from the exhaustion of keeping the handstand, that would cause a tremor on the easel. So it was really taking it out of, okay, now it's in this person's arm. It was just the easel that would shake. And so it would cause a tremor in your drawing. And at the same time, there was a poem from someone with Parkinson's about tremor in a very abstract way as well. So it was a very artistic way of getting to the experience of tremor. In this case, the technology, the setup is very complicated. You have, ideally, in the ideal version, the sensor, the moment a tremor is sensed on the arm, it would trigger the vibration on the easel and it would trigger the audio. But for someone to connect all those dots, that requires like a interactive design and user experience that I don't have yet. So that was, I think, one of the complex, I love this in the idea, but in the reality, it requires, okay, someone needs to understand what exactly is happening and how those pieces fit together without you having to say, okay, when this happens, this will happen and this will happen, which ends up taking away from the experience. Kind of running out of time, so I'm going to move on. This is my last little bit. So biomusic was one of the other technologies we used, and I've already introduced it. But here the question was around, what does the body communicate and miscommunicate to others? So we are always in communication. And when you have Parkinson's, your body language changes. So you might be miscommunicating things, or it might betray things that you don't want to communicate. And when you're a performer, a circus performer, you are also, your body is your tool of communication. So in one case, you're sort of forced into a spotlight, and in the other case, you are in the spotlight as a performer. So that was a question we gathered around. And one of the first activities we did with the biomusic, we just had the music playing based on the physiological state. And actually, this was an idea from Beck, who participated in this part, just to have someone stand in the center without putting on a performance. It's an activity often used in clowning. So just to be in front of people. We had Serge standing in the center, and he was looking at everyone, and we were listening to the music coming from his physiological state as he was looking at everyone in the room. And he's a bit of a clown and he likes to provoke people. He was looking at people and like trying to get something out of them. And I saw that. And so I said, okay, Serge, we were in a dance studio. I said, can you just turn to the mirror? And so after he did his round, he turned to the mirror, and it was much more in his face than in the music that I saw this shift. Like, okay, that I had a moment of, oh, that might have been too much. And you could see that it really changed his state. And coming out of that, he said, he in an interview later said that moment was a key moment where I recognized he saw his tremor first, and he was like, to feel it is very different than to see it. And so he thought right away, oh my God, when people see me, they see Parkinson's, they see the tremor. And yet he was surrounded by these people who were looking at him and not at all seeing the same thing. And so for him, being surrounded by others, watching him, and then having this biomusic that was revealing his inner state, was a moment where he recognized that what he sees in the mirror and the reflection he has and the projection of what he thinks others see is not at all what they're necessarily seeing. So he wrote this really beautiful text afterwards about le miroir et le regard des autres, so the mirror and the perception of others, and how much those two things can be very different in the experience of Parkinson's. I'll just kind of go through this very quickly, but we then did an activity where we decided instead of music, let's have audio recordings. So based on our physiological state, it would play different audio recordings. And I was the first victim or the first volunteer for this, where I recorded 3 different audios for different levels of stress. So 3 different levels of negative self-talk in a situation where I might be insecure in front of other people. And I had that playing based on my physiological state. So it was the same activity. I was looking at people. Again, this was Beck's idea. And as I could hear the audio go to the worst version and the most revealing and rather vulnerable text that I had recorded, I was trying to refocus and stay centered and bring that back down. And so it became this kind of biofeedback activity, but this very vulnerable activity to be doing in front of people. I think that brings up a question in participatory research of how much of yourself do you expose and bring into it. But it again brought up this question of what do we see, what do we trust? So some of the participants in the room said, like, this moment was so transformative in the process and was such a powerful moment. And others said, well, I didn't believe the technology. Like, I don't think it was, you didn't look nervous and it was telling me you were nervous, and I don't believe that. So it was again this question of what are we perceiving and what do we choose to believe? So this ended up becoming this sort of, again, 2 different approaches. One was that we had Serge's text, and then we had a circus performer record her version of what it is to look in the mirror as a circuit or as someone who is using their body as their livelihood. And so we had those 2 versions playing. You'd put your finger on a biomusic sensor and hear those 2 recordings as you looked in the mirror. And then we also used biomusic with the sort of audio, the verbal outputs in a performance. So here we had Heidi and Serge doing a performance. And the idea was that when they would synchronize or when there would be an action they're doing together, you would hear audio that was about the encounter between circus and Parkinson's. But this revealed how technology can also be a distractor. So here, the body was already communicating so much. When we had the circus performers or people with Parkinson's performing and doing something with their body, the focus of the audience was on the body. And then the technology, that became a layer that was not only redundant, but actually a distractor, because then people are trying to figure out, okay, so when I hear this, it means their heartbeat increased and this, and it became this very cognitive state and took away from what was already being communicated. So that brought up this, okay, well, when do we need technology when the body is already communicating, and how might that become a distraction? I'll go through this very quickly. Sorry, I had a lot I wanted to share today, but I just wanted to end also on, again, the participant experience. So these are words that I asked in my interviews with participants. The first one was just, what was your overall experience of the project in 3 words? And then the second one was, what was your experience specifically focused around the group dynamics and interpersonal experience? And a lot of these words, I mean, I find the sort of more negative valent words interesting too, but a lot of them were community, connection, curiosity, learning, respect, caring. And that, was also named as a key outcome of the project. More than what we could communicate through technologies was the community that was created in the project. And so I think for me, that's something that shouldn't be, it's not just like on our ethics form, we say benefit to participant. You might enjoy this experience. It's core to what I hope to do in my research. And I think it's specifically the context of doing participatory research creation, that there's a creative output that we're working towards together, but that there's a research question that we all have some knowledge around and something to learn from and a curiosity that brings us together. I think that's a very unique context from which to build community from very different walks of life and ways of being. So maybe I'll return to this in the question period if I need to. This is sort of my upcoming project in the next 3 years, is really building on what I've done previously with Peace of Mind, but then also looking at whether Peace of Mind and the process, the approach could be used in a different community. And so, I've worked with Parkinson's and dementia, but I'm also very interested in autism, amongst other neurological conditions, specifically as a way of being in the body and being in interaction that is different and that is misunderstood, and that might not always best be conveyed in verbal communication. And so I think there's a lot of parallels in the experience of Parkinson's and autism, very, very different experiences, but I think the approach that we've taken in the last 2 projects could also perhaps benefit or address some needs within that community. And maybe I'll just leave this up. This is more for people who are working here, because I'd love to, and Stephanie and I have been talking about bringing some of this work here to bridge and research, artistic and broader community. And I think, I have some ideas of how that might happen, but I'll leave it at that. And just want to say thank you so much to all of you and to my participants and collaborators. And if you're interested in the YouTube or in the filmed performances, you can find them on YouTube. Thank you. Do we have time for questions? Yeah, okay. Questions, yeah, go ahead.
I'm Max. I'm the grant facilitator in Stephanie and Julie's department. My question is a tiny bit of a segue from this. That we talk about, say, how dogs can smell fear and how lots of non-human animals give off a lot of pheromones. And while human interaction, I think, is predominantly visual and verbal, are you aware of research to see what sort of olfactory signals we give off and how we interpret them? That if I were really fearful right now, I'd probably communicate mostly with my voice and my body and my visual signals, but I'd probably also give off some sort of smell.
Can you check back? Is he? No, I'm kidding. Yeah. Yeah.
I assume that we give off
signals
and
for sure. There's a lot of, I don't know this research personally, but there's a lot of research in social neuroscience around olfactory cues, pheromones, etc. And especially in the era of doing a lot virtually, like how much information we're taking away, physical touch too, especially if you're working with communities where, maybe the verbal, as I said, like maybe verbal communication is not the primary form of connection. And so when we move to virtual formats and we take away touch and smell, how is that impacting our social relationships and our ways of interacting? I think that the other component in that is some people, like there's this is also a tangent, but that there's a biomarker of Parkinson's that certain people can smell. And so actually smell became a topic in our project, in that it was this thing that was that like researchers have this whole knowledge around Parkinson's and around the biomarkers of Parkinson's that is totally inaccessible to someone with Parkinson's. And so the smell became sort of a metaphor for that there's this layer of knowledge and of diagnostic value that someone with Parkinson's doesn't have access to themselves. But anyway, there is a lot of research, but I don't personally do it or know it. Yeah.
If no one is answering questions, since I'm a grant facilitator, I have to ask, how do you feel about applying for funding when you're bridging the arts and the sciences? And I think historically they were kind of viewed as separate things.
Yeah, that's a great question. How do I feel about it? I think a few people in this room have this struggle. It is a struggle. I think for one, it's not just art science research, but participatory research. How do you convince the granting agency that you know what you're doing when you don't know what you're doing yet, because it's a participatory process? And then in terms of art science funding, so we were I think I learned a lot in Peace of Mind. First, I thought that the budget I had through my knowledge translation grant with Stephanie would be enough for the artistic production as well. And then I was completely wrong. And so that was when I learned, okay, so some aspects of this project I need to go through arts funding, others I need to go through scientific. This new project I have is actually a joint fund, as much as I can speak about it right now, through the tri-agency like NSERC, CIHR, SSHRC, and the Canada Arts Council. So it's recognizing that, creation can be either a knowledge translation output of a research project or could be embedded in the research project itself. So I think there's a little bit of shift also in the Quebecois landscape of doing more arts-based research.
Can I add?
Yeah.
One of the other big struggles here, you alluded to it, that sure. Online. Thank you. Okay, I think one of the other big struggles here is that when you write a grant, they ask you what your objectives are, what your outcomes need to be, and part of being true to the participatory process is that you follow where the process takes you, and so you can't tell them these are going to be my outcomes, and this is what we're going to deliver, and these are the questions we're going to ask. And so finding that tension between knowing what you need to write down in order to get the money and being true to, we're going to follow where the participants take us, and we're going to do what they tell us is important, is, I think, just a struggle, not just in getting the money, but when you have the money, just navigating that constant tension. And I think Naila has navigated that for 5 years, that, trying to figure out the balance between delivering on the grant and where the participants are.
For sure. Yeah. And deliverables of the grant, of the collaborators you've involved in the project. How do you ensure that you are responding to those needs, but also allow the project to go a different way? At some point, the question was, it started with how do technologies, and it became, can technologies do this? Because what ended up being so core to the project was the human experience, which it was about that all along. But I think throughout the project, it became more clear, okay, it's not about, okay, we need to produce these technologies and innovate technologies. It's about how do we recenter on the human through the lens of these different technologies as prompts or starting points. Yeah.
I love this, first of all. I love this opportunity to create impact. And I think a lot of researchers and clinicians would empathize with what you shared in the beginning, that we yearn for that connection, we yearn for hearing back from the people that we want to help. I think this is also a unique opportunity to hear back from, for us clinicians and researchers, from the people that we're trying to help. What are the things that we fall short on? Sometimes when we talk to them, say in a clinical setting, we are sharing things that we think they think are helpful. It's not. We ask them questions on things we think are important for diagnostic purposes and treatment. And I'm sure sometimes we share things and we're like, that's not helpful. So my question is, what are some things or highlights of the experience on what we fell short on, and what are something we wish we heard or asked about that we missed? What are we in research for?
That's a really great question. There was a sort of pilot project before living rooms where we interviewed a few healthcare professionals, really three, and some people with Parkinson's and informal caregivers around these questions of communication needs and barriers, particularly around experiences that are hard to communicate in words. And I think there, I mean, some people shared from the Parkinson's perspective, like I want to feel heard firstly by my neurologist, and that like the therapeutic alliance or the relational component was really important first and foremost. But I think there was also throughout this project, there was a lot of talk about, you know, when I got my diagnosis, the neurologist said, you have Parkinson's, 5 to 10 years, débrouille-toi, like figure it out. So, you know, cold, and that was it. And another person, their experience was she said it and then took a phone call right after. So those are the worst case examples. And I think there was also this recognition in the project coming from people with Parkinson's that they don't know the neurologist's perspective. They don't know what you or, you know, someone in the medical profession is firstly dealing with, like, and what information they need to know that's helpful for them. Like there's also this lack of empathy, I think, towards the neurologist and what they're dealing with, and what for me, it was, yeah, something that I would love to work with more clinicians. If they weren't so busy, I would love them to be more directly involved, because I think it's also important to hear their perspective of what, you know, why are they asking the questions they're asking, et cetera. Yeah, and then there was this one neurologist said, you know, I'd love to try a tremor armband. I'd love to try a VR of hallucinations, but ultimately, if it's not a actionable item, like what does it help? And a few caregivers said this too, informal caregivers. What does it help to know your experience better if I can't do anything about it? And I think that's a really valuable perspective as well, beyond, you know, feeling or showing that you hear or understand. If it doesn't change your behavior, then what? So I think that's an important question. But anyway, I'll think about your question more.
Thank you.
I think we're out of time
Okay.
now. But on behalf of the center, thank you so much, Naila. We have all been so blessed to listen to such a inspiring and just like exciting, creative set of projects and program of research. For trainees, I just want to remind you that there's a coffee hour with Naila after this, so please stay and continue the conversation. And I look forward to chatting more as well. So thanks, and please join me in a round of applause for Naila.
Thank you so much for giving your time this morning.